this is a quintessentially human practice that we have evidence of throughout our history.
The ancient Egyptians were full of surprises, from mind-shocking afterlife rituals to eye-opening contraception methods.
Like nices, they're prepared as if they were ready to be eaten, so they're plucked and they're sort of semi-cooked.
Their unique customs and beliefs will leave you in shock as we explore the strange and fascinating world of ancient Egypt.
Sorry, cats. You weren't the only divine creatures. All sorts of animals were considered pretty special.
Pharaohs married their sisters.
But he was not an ordinary man, but rather closer to the gods than to his humble subjects.
Royal families have always found ways to hold on to power, but ancient Egyptian rulers took it to another level, marrying their siblings. Pharaohs believed they were living gods, and since the deities Osiris and Isis were siblings and spouses, they followed the same practice. It wasn't just about keeping up appearances. Marrying within the family ensured wealth, land, and the throne were tightly controlled. But while the royals did it for power and divine status, things took a strange turn during Roman rule. Records show that brother-sister marriages weren't just limited to the elite during this time. Among ordinary people, it became surprisingly widespread. Some experts believe that many of these marriages weren't actually between biological siblings, but rather involved men who were adopted into their wives' families to keep property from leaving the household. Others argue that these were genuine sibling unions meant to preserve wealth or maintain cultural identity, especially among Greeks living in Egypt. Whatever the reason, Roman Egypt remains one of the only known societies where sibling marriage was this common among ordinary people. But inbreeding came with a price. The most famous case is Tutankhamun, who was the child of siblings. His body showed signs of genetic disorders, including a clubfoot and a cleft palate. And this wasn't unique. Centuries of intermarriage likely led to numerous health problems among royal bloodlines. Even outside of Egypt, other powerful families across history, from the Incas to European monarchs, practiced close relative marriage to keep their dynasties strong. The Spanish Habsburgs pushed this to the extreme, with their last ruler, Charles II, suffering from severe physical and mental disabilities due to generations of inbreeding. Despite the risks, many rulers ignored them. To them, marrying within the family meant protecting power, not just wealth. Even when these unions produced weak heirs, kings and pharaohs had many wives and concubines to secure their lineage. It was a dangerous gamble, but one they were willing to take. This discovery is shocking, but the next one is even more unbelievable. If you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Ancient Egyptian birth control. Ancient birth control was nothing short of wild. 4,000 years ago, Egyptian women were stuffing crocodile dung mixed with honey inside themselves, all in an attempt to stop pregnancy. Sounds disgusting, right? But believe it or not, there was some logic to it. The dried dung acted as a physical barrier, blocking sperm from reaching an egg, while the honey, now known to have antimicrobial properties, helped prevent infections. To make things even more effective, they sometimes added ground-up acacia leaves containing a natural spermicide. It was crude, yes, but the basic concept still holds up. And Egypt wasn't the only place where people got creative. The Talmud mentions women using vinegar-soaked sponges, which not only blocked the cervix, but also changed the vaginal pH to make it hostile for sperm. In ancient Greece and Rome, women used everything from lead mixed with oil and honey to ghee combined with rock salt. There's even evidence that elephant dung was once considered an option. The idea of using toxic substances as birth control sounds horrifying now, but back then, people were willing to try anything to avoid an unplanned pregnancy. Of course, some methods were downright dangerous. In many cultures, women take herbal concoctions to prevent or end pregnancy, but the wrong dose could be lethal. Some even believed that sneezing or high-kicking after sex would expel semen, completely useless, but people were desperate. Others went for a more extreme approach, inserting primitive IUD-like objects made of metal or glass. Painful? Absolutely. But effective? Possibly. Fast forward a few centuries and things didn't improve much. Less than 100 years ago, Lysol was marketed as a contraceptive. That's right, people were douching with a household cleaning product, thinking it would prevent pregnancy. Unsurprisingly, this led to chemical burns and serious health problems. But the real breakthrough came in the 20th century when scientists realized something game-changing. During pregnancy, ovulation stops. researchers like Herman and Stein experimented with ovarian extracts, and by 1956, Gregory Pincus developed the first birth control pill. This was revolutionary. For the first time in history, women had a reliable, science-backed way to control their fertility. Since then, birth control has come a long way. Pills, patches, implants, and IUDs have transformed family planning. Now, researchers are exploring even more futuristic options, like using ultrasound to induce temporary male sterility, or high doses of melatonin to suppress female fertility. The journey from crocodile dung to modern contraception is one of medical history's most bizarre yet fascinating chapters. But what's coming next? The subsequent discovery is even more shocking. Stay tuned with us. The use of magic in ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt was a world powered by magic. It wasn't a trick or illusion. It was the force that made everything possible. It brought life into existence, sustained the world, healed the sick, and even ensured a safe passage to the afterlife. Every aspect of daily life was infused with it, and no one doubted its power. Take childbirth, for example. If a woman struggled to conceive, she might spend a night in a special temple chamber dedicated to Bes, the god of fertility, hoping his presence would help. Bes wasn't just a protector of mothers and children. He was everywhere. People carried his amulets, tattooed his image on their skin, and surrounded newborns with his likeness for protection. From birth to death, magic was always there, guiding every step. At the heart of it all was Heka, the god of magic. He wasn't just another deity, he was the force that made all other gods powerful. Without him, nothing would function. Even the gods feared him. He never had a temple or priests because he didn't need them. He was in everything, everywhere, all the time. In the ancient texts, Heka declares that he existed before anything else. Even the gods. He was the raw power of the universe. Religion and magic went hand in hand. The temple priests performed rituals to maintain order, honoring their gods and ensuring balance in the world. But when someone needed personal help, whether for health, protection, or guidance, they turned to magic directly. Magic was a living force woven into every action and belief. It wasn't separate from daily life. It was daily life. This deep connection between magic and reality was evident in medicine. Healers weren't just doctors, they were magicians too. Some focused on practical treatments, while others specialized in magical healing, but both used spells alongside their remedies. Medical texts from ancient Egypt don't just list treatments, they include incantations meant to call upon divine forces. Temples had 3 special sections called Houses of Life, where medical knowledge was preserved, studied, and expanded. These weren't just places to learn anatomy. They were sacred spaces where healing was treated as a blend of science and supernatural power. Even the legendary Imhotep, one of history's earliest known physicians, recognized that diseases could have natural causes. But that didn't mean magic wasn't involved. These beliefs shape a person's entire existence. From birth, through illness, and even in death, magic was the unseen thread holding everything together. And the most incredible part? This wasn't just some forgotten superstition. It was a way of life, as real to them as the air they breathed. This discovery is fascinating, but what comes next is even more astonishing. An ancient truth that will leave you speechless. Egyptians of both sexes wore makeup. Ancient Egyptians were obsessed with beauty, but this wasn't just about looking good. Health, protection, and even the afterlife. Both men and women painted their eyes, colored their lips, and styled their hair with a care that might surprise them. And the things they used? Some were practical, some were dangerous, and some were downright mysterious. Over 4,000 years ago, the Egyptians perfected the smoky eye. They ground up ores like malachite and galena to create a dark substance called kohl, which they applied heavily around their eyes. This wasn't just for fashion. They believed it protected them from the gods Horus and Ra. But here's where things get wild. Modern research suggests that their makeup's lead may have helped prevent eye infections. Poisonous? Yes. Protective? Also yes. Makeup wasn't limited to the eyes. Women stained their cheeks with red ochre and colored their hands and nails with henna. And the perfumes? They didn't hold back. Oil, myrrh, cinnamon. Expensive blends meant to make them smell divine. Literally. They associated fragrance with beauty, fertility, and rebirth, taking perfumes and makeup into their graves. The idea was simple. Looking attractive in the afterlife might help with resurrection. Hair was another big deal. Egyptians used tweezers, razors, and blood-based potions to remove unwanted hair. Yes, blood, but they also adored wigs. Some were made from human hair, others from plant fibers, and all were styled precisely. The best wigs had tiny braids layered into elaborate double-decker styles, and beeswax was used to hold everything in place. Priests shaved their heads completely, partly for hygiene, partly for purity. And elite women. They adorned their wigs with golden rings, proving that even in ancient times, hair accessories were a status symbol. Cosmetic boxes belonging to high-status individuals like Khamenei, the royal butler of Pharaoh Amenemhat IV, have been found in tombs. His cedar and ivory box contained cutouts for ointment jars, mirrors, and beauty tools, proving that self-care was serious business, even in death. And speaking of mirrors, these weren't just for checking appearances. They were shaped like the sun, a symbol of creation and rebirth. Some even had handles designed to resemble papyrus stems, a plant linked to fertility. And then there were the palettes. Ancient Egyptians didn't buy their makeup, they made it. Stone palettes shaped like animals, fish, and even mating turtles were used to mix pigments. These weren't random designs. Each creature had a deeper meaning tied to regeneration, chaos, or divine protection. They believed beauty was more than skin deep, a connection to the gods. Weird pregnancy test. Ancient Egypt had some wild medical ideas, but this one worked. Over 3,000 years ago, Egyptian doctors came up with a pregnancy test that sounded bizarre, but had surprising results. The method? A woman would urinate on 2 different bags of grain, one with wheat, the other with barley. If either sprouted, she was pregnant. If not, she wasn't. But they took it even further. If the barley grew first, they believed she was having a boy. If the wheat grew first, it meant a girl. Fast forward to the 1960s, and researchers decided to test this ancient method. Shockingly, about 70% of the time, urine from pregnant women did make the grains sprout, while urine from men or non-pregnant women didn't. The test wasn't accurate for predicting the baby's sex, but it did seem to detect pregnancy. Scientists suspect that the high estrogen levels in pregnant women's urine helped the seeds grow. This wasn't just a one-time practice. The same test appeared in ancient medical texts across different civilizations. Even medieval doctors, often called piss prophets, used urine to diagnose pregnancy. Some would mix it with wine to see if it reacted, while others burned cloth soaked in urine and judged the result based on the smell. It sounds ridiculous now, but people have taken these methods seriously for centuries. Ancient Egyptian medical texts reveal how advanced their understanding of the human body was. For years, historians believed they didn't know what kidneys were for, but their writings prove otherwise. They were one of the first civilizations to document the function of these organs in medical texts. Their knowledge didn't stay locked in history either. Many of their medical ideas spread to the Greeks and Romans through the Middle Ages, influencing medicine for thousands of years. As for the wheat and barley test, it had an unbelievably long life. Versions appeared in German folklore as late as the 17th century, and some reports claim it was still in use in parts of Asia Minor in the 1960s. That's over 3,000 years of history for one simple test. While most ancient remedies were complete nonsense, this one had just enough truth behind it to make it last through the ages. This discovery is fascinating, but the next one is even more weird. Something so mysterious that it might change how we see the past. Elongated skulls.
This is a phenomenon that we see across the world and throughout human history.
Ancient Egypt has always been full of mysteries, but one of the strangest involves the unusual head shapes of Pharaoh Akhenaten and his family. Their skulls were oddly elongated, something visible in statues and carvings. Some say this was just an artistic choice, but was it? For years, scholars searched for answers. Some believed Akhenaten had a medical condition that altered his bone structure. Hydrocephaly was one idea, but that usually leads to an early death. Froelich's syndrome? That would have made him infertile, which doesn't fit with the many children linked to him. The best guess was Marfan's syndrome, which can cause long limbs and skull abnormalities. But even that theory had problems. A disease like that wouldn't cause the entire family to have perfectly symmetrical skull deformations. This is where things get interesting. Some believe Akhenaten's family may have practiced skull binding, a technique in which a baby's head is tightly wrapped to force it into an elongated shape. This practice has been found in cultures worldwide, but Egyptologists have mostly rejected the idea. However, one piece of evidence suggests they may be wrong. French sculptor Elizabeth Daines created a forensic bust of Tutankhamun, using computed tomography scan of his skull. What she found was stunning. His head wasn't long, it had a slight depression at the top, and another near the back of the neck, exactly where binding pressure would have been applied. Even the skull of the mysterious KV-55 mummy, possibly Akhenaten himself, had the same shape. If this were a genetic disorder, it would be scarce and conveniently affect the royal family. But if it was head binding, it explains everything. And the mysteries don't stop there. Ancient Egyptian art shows people wearing strange, cone-shaped objects on their heads. For centuries, no one knew whether these were real or artistic symbols. Some thought they were perfume cones, solid lumps of scented fat that would melt over the wearer's head. Others believed they were purely symbolic, much like halos in Christian paintings. But no physical evidence of them had ever been found, until now. In 2009, archaeologists in Amarna uncovered a burial unlike anything they'd ever seen. In the grave of a woman, they found something resting on her skull, a perfectly shaped head cone. Another burial turned up a second one. It took years of research to confirm it, but these mysterious cones were real. Their purpose, however, remains unknown. Were they religious, decorative, a status symbol? No one knows for sure. Egyptians kept many animals as pets. Ancient Egyptians had a deep connection with animals, and not just for work or protection. Many were treated like beloved family members. Egyptians believed animals were linked to the gods, making them sacred companions rather than just pets. Cats were the clear favorites associated with the goddess Bastet, but dogs, hawks, ibises, lions, and even baboons had their place in Egyptian homes. Some animals were so cherished that they were mummified and buried alongside their owners, ensuring they remained together in the afterlife. Pets weren't just for companionship, though. Some had jobs. Egyptian police officers, for example, trained dogs and even monkeys to help them on patrol. Temples dedicated to the crocodile god Sobek kept live crocodiles as sacred animals, while other creatures were carefully trained to assist in various roles. But one thing was clear: Egyptians adored their pets, much like people today. One of the most striking examples of this devotion comes from the high priestess Maatkare Mutemhat of the 21st dynasty. She had sworn a life of celibacy, so when archaeologists discovered a tiny mummy at her feet, they first assumed it was a child, which didn't make sense. It wasn't until 1968 that X-rays revealed the truth. It was her pet monkey, carefully mummified to stay with her forever. Not only this, dogs held a special place in Egyptian society. They weren't just hunters or guards, they were family. The Egyptian word for dog, wow, even mimicked the sound of barking. Dogs were given names like brave one, reliable, and even useless. They were so valued that families would shave off their eyebrows in mourning when one died, a visible sign of grief. Egyptians believed they would reunite with their dogs in the afterlife, where they would continue hunting and running alongside their owners, just as they had in life. Dogs were linked to the jackal-headed god Anubis, who guided souls to the afterlife. Temples dedicated to Anubis had entire cemeteries just for dogs, where they were buried with honor. The pharaohs, too, treasured their hounds. Tomb paintings of Tutankhamun and Ramesses the Great show them hunting with their dogs, their bond lasting even beyond death. And then, of course, there were the cats. Worshipped, cherished, and practically ruling Egyptian households, cats weren't just pets, they were divine. They kept homes free of pests and were seen as protectors. When a cat died, the entire household went into mourning. Families had them mummified and buried with great care, ensuring their feline companions would be waiting for them in the afterlife. Archaeologists have uncovered staggering evidence of this bond. In the catacombs of Saqqara, over 8 million dog skeletons were found, likely part of a grand necropolis dedicated to Anubis. Whether they were sacrifices or carefully buried pets remains a mystery. However, one thing is sure: Egyptians loved and honored their animals in a way that still fascinates us today. The ancient Egyptians mummifying pets.
And those are really cool because the ancient Egyptians believed that you can take everything with you.
The ancient Egyptians had a love for their pets that went beyond what most people could imagine. Just like today, where we pamper our pets with outfits and treats, the Egyptians had a deep connection with their animals, but they took it even further. When a pet died, the solution wasn't just a grave in the backyard. No, they mummified their pets to ensure they could join them in the afterlife. But what about the times when the pet's owner passed away first? In those cases, some pets were left to live out their days and buried near their owner's tomb. Others, though, weren't so lucky. If the owner didn't leave instructions, the pet might be killed so that it could be mummified and placed in the tomb. It's a grim thought, but that's how much they cherished their pets. Pets weren't just cats like many think. The Egyptians also had dogs, falcons, monkeys, and even snakes. Many animals were mummified and buried with their owners, showing Egyptians' high level of affection for their beloved companions. The most famous example might be the cat of Prince Thutmose, one of the earliest pet mummies discovered. This cat was not just a pet, but a symbol of loyalty, love, and devotion that even death couldn't separate. Ancient embalmers' strange practices. Ancient Egyptian embalmers had a job that was both sacred and gruesome, but some of them took things way too far. According to the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, families didn't trust these embalmers with the bodies of their loved ones, especially women. Instead of handing them over right away, they would let the bodies sit out for several days. Why? Because they feared the embalmers might get too curious. Letting the bodies decompose a little was their way of preventing any unspeakable acts. And if that was a genuine concern, something dark must have happened more than once. But the strangeness didn't stop there. The embalming process itself was shocking. The first step, brain removal. But this wasn't some careful surgical procedure. The embalmers took a hooked tool, shoved it up through the nose, and smashed a bone at the top of the nasal cavity. Then, using that same tool, they scrambled the brain and pulled it out piece by piece. The goal was to dry out the body completely, preventing decay and preparing the deceased for the afterlife. For the ancient Egyptians, mummification was a sacred art, ensuring the soul could journey beyond death. The more elaborate the process, the higher the status of the embalmed person. And if an Egyptian soldier's skull showed signs of this brutal brain removal, it meant he was given a proper burial, maybe even an honored one. The practices of these embalmers were a mix of devotion and horror, a glimpse into a world where the dead were prepared for eternity in ways that might make your skin crawl. But as chilling as this is, the subsequent discovery is even more unsettling. The horrifying process of mummification. The ancient Egyptians had a chilling way of preserving their dead. Mummification took 70 days and was reserved for the elite, pharaohs, nobles, and the wealthy. It wasn't just about protecting a body. It was a sacred ritual steeped in magic and prayers. It all started with removing internal organs, except for the heart, which is believed to hold a person's soul. The brain, that was pulled out through the nostrils using a hook, carefully done to avoid damaging the face. Once emptied, the body had to be dried to prevent decay. Embalmers covered it in natron, a special type of salt, which sucked out all moisture. After 40 days, the body was stuffed with linen and straw to restore shape. Then came the final step, the iconic wrapping. Layer upon layer of linen was coated with resin to hold everything together. The mummy was then placed in a coffin, ready for its journey to the afterlife. But Egypt wasn't the only place with mummies. Some formed naturally, preserved by extreme cold or dry air. The oldest mummy in North America, found in Spirit Cave, Nevada, lay untouched for over 10,000 years, perfectly preserved by the cave's arid conditions. In Europe, the famous Otzi the Iceman, frozen in an alpine glacier for over 5,000 years, still bore the wounds of his mysterious murder. Yet, long before Egypt perfected mummification, the Chinchorro people of Chile were already preserving their dead, 7,000 years ago. Unlike the Egyptians, they mummified everyone, even infants and unborn babies. They removed flesh, stuffed bodies with plants, and coated them with clay masks. Their methods were so advanced that their mummies predate Egypt's by 2,000 years. Ancient Egyptians loved board games. Ancient Egyptians loved board games that would rival even the most avid gamers of today. After a long day of work along the Nile River, they would unwind by playing games like Mayhem and Dogs and Jackals. But the one that stood out was Senet. This game, dating back as far as 3,500 before Christ, was played on a longboard with 30 squares. Players moved their pieces based on dice rolls or throwing sticks. Though we don't know all the rules today, there's no denying how much the Egyptians loved it. Queen Nefertari, wife of the mighty pharaoh Rameses II, was even shown in her tomb playing Senet. And it's no surprise that pharaohs like Tutankhamun had their own Senet boards buried with them. This game wasn't just a way to pass the time, it was also a way to connect with the gods, with players hoping for divine protection from gods like Ra, Thoth, and Osiris. That's why Senet was often found in tombs, offering a connection to the afterlife. But Senet wasn't the only game on the block. Mayhem, another popular game, was played on a board shaped like a snake. It dates back to 3000 before Christ, but Senet is considered older. Both games reflect the Egyptians' deep love for leisure and the spiritual beliefs they intertwined with everyday life. Ancient Egyptians wore fake beards. Ancient Egypt had a symbol of power so unique that it still grabs attention today: the false beard. This wasn't just for any regular guy. It symbolized kingship worn by pharaohs to show they were divine rulers. The false beard dates back to 3000 before Christ. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. Made from gold, bronze, or precious stones, these beards were tied around the ears and fastened behind the head. But why the beard? It wasn't just a fashion statement. The false beard was linked to the gods, especially Osiris, the god of the afterlife, and Ra, the sun god. Pharaohs wore them to show they were not just earthly rulers, but divine beings directly connected to the gods. It was like saying, "I'm not just a king, I am a living god." Even more mind-blowing, female pharaohs like Hatshepsut wore the false beard to solidify their power. She wore the same regalia as male rulers, beard included, to prove she was the legitimate pharaoh. The false beard was a sign of authority, not gender. Over time, the beard's shape evolved. From a short square-ended beard in the Old Kingdom to a long braided one in the New Kingdom, it symbolized divine kingship and power. Pharaohs wore it during religious ceremonies, even burial rituals, to stay connected to the heavenly world and the afterlife. Ancient Egyptians had bizarre customs, from their love for false beards to their fascinating burial rituals. These practices show their world's differences, yet they were deeply connected to their gods and beliefs. Stay tuned for more surprising facts from history that will leave you amazed.